Hello and welcome. Victrex plc are producers of high-performance engineering polymers. They sell these to product manufacturers in the form of both powders and granules. Plus, they market their own range of thermoplastic products, which includes films, pipes, tapes and coatings. Most significantly, Victrex offers a bespoke service for the design and manufacturing of injection moulded alternatives for metal parts. And these parts are widely used for medical applications such as prosthetic joints, and they can be used as strong, lightweight replacements for metal components in the aerospace and automotive industries. Now, Mark's been a shareholder for quite a while, so let's see what he has to say about Victrex in this, episode 33 of the Desert Island Investor. This episode of the podcast is generously hosted by Progressive Equity Research. Visit their website at progressive-research.com. Mark, you have been on your travels again, and this time it was to one of your holdings that we have not previously covered, Victrex, ticker symbol VCT, and they are manufacturers of high-performing polymers for demanding applications.
Yes, I sailed the raft up the foul coast to Thornton Cleveland in my native Lancashire, where Victrex have their HQ, and had a very friendly, thorough and interesting meeting with Andrew Hansen, our Director of Investor Relations. Andrew has had 10 years with the company and previously worked with Glaxo, Centrica and Northern Foods, so all familiar names.
Okay, as usual, can we have the base numbers, please?
Victrex has a market cap of 726 million, a yield of 7.1%, and a PE of 16.3, and that's based on a current share price of £8.34 and a halfpenny. Now, that yield is based on a dividend payment for the year of 59.56 pence, which is not covered.
Not covered. Can you elaborate on what that means?
By cover, we mean the degree to which the dividend is covered by its earnings. In Victrex's case, the earnings per share were 19.8 pence. So you can see that they've paid out more in dividends per share than their earnings. Now, clearly, that is unsustainable in the long run. But often, if a company has a blip or if they are heavily cyclical, they like to maintain a smooth, consistent dividend policy if possible. Sometimes you find companies taking on debt to pay the dividend. That's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And shareholders think they are receiving a juicy dividend, but it's only being paid via borrowing. If a dividend is barely covered, it could be a warning further out of a dividend cut. They do say that as a rule of thumb, you should look for at least a dividend cover of 2, but this differs from business to business. Some younger growth companies have their modest dividend covered multiple times as they're ploughing profits back into the business for more growth. A mature business can be more of an income play.
Okay, so what's your history with this holding?
I first purchased in July 2016 at £15.67. I added in May 2017 at £19.48. I made a further addition around August 2017, but unfortunately, I've misplaced that contract note. Now, through some backup notes, I believe this was around £21.95. Again, in December 2017 at £24.11. And lastly, in January 2019 at £22.47. So you can see that I'm clearly underwater on this one. I'm nearer to the seabed than the surface. And it's been on a steady slide over the past couple of years where the share price has halved. And I think I've been guilty of neglecting this one and not giving it due attention. And I've focused on my better ideas. And part of the purpose of the visit was to up my game.
And how long has Victrex been listed?
Not everybody will have heard of Victrex, but more people have heard of the company it was spun out of in 1993, and that was ICI. It was floated in 1995, and it was a bit of an outlier in advanced materials and had less than 60 employees, and today it has over 1,100. And besides Thornton Cleveland, they've got UK sites in Leeds, Rotherham, They are also on Teesside and Stonehouse in Gloucestershire. And it's a little good news and bad news. 98% of Victrex product is exported. So on one hand, they are an export champion, but sadly it's because the UK don't manufacture much anymore. Encouragingly, Victrex produce about 80% of their own granules or resin in the UK, so this gives an element of control through vertical integration and some UK jobs. And they've also commenced production in China for the domestic Chinese market, and they envisage 100 to 200 tons of product from the Panjin facility in the full year 2025. Now, this compares to existing group production of 3,731 tons.
Right, so in my role as the non-investor in this podcast, it's the first time I've heard you speak of somebody in investor relations. So do all companies have somebody designated to that particular role?
Smaller companies generally can't afford, let's call it the luxury of an IR manager. You often find that the chairman and or the company secretary is the point of contact. Now, larger businesses, yes, but I can't give you a threshold in either market cap or revenue as a tipping point where it warrants an investor relations manager. Now, Andrew was very accommodating in offering a couple of dates and the time we had together, and I think this was around 2.5 hours, consisting of a thorough conversation and a tour. But on the whole, my experiences with investor relation managers has been pretty mixed. Presumably, the raison d'etre of investor relations is to foster good and not bad relationships, and as a basic requirement, some relationship at all. And a little bit of naming and shaming. Ahead of the merger between Smurfit Kappa and the US Westrock, I emailed at Smurfit with a query to ir@smurfitkappa.com. No reply. I sent 2 follow-ups and still no reply. And their head of investor relations is Kieran Potts. I sent him a LinkedIn connection request with my reason, the query. No response. And on his LinkedIn profile, he hasn't made a single post. So he's not exactly getting Smurfit Westrock out there, is he? More recently, another of my holdings, Central Asia Metals, announced the disposal of an asset in Chile, Copper Bay, where they held a majority stake. Now, this consisted of copper tailings, similar to that of their successful Kunrab facility in Kazakhstan. Now, a number of years ago, after feasibility studies, they established that the site was not viable and the stake remained dormant on the books. Now, Central Asia Metals announced that they sold Copper Bay to Guardian Metals for $7.5 million. However, the first $3.75 million is payable when production surpasses 7,500 tons, and the remaining $3.75 million when production reaches 15,000 tons. Result, at first glance, this has salvaged something and tidied up a loose end. However, I was sure this site had not been developed, and in the RNS it talks about a project path to future development. Now, I emailed Richard Morgan, our investor relations manager, for clarity, and he confirmed there is no current production from Copper Bay assets, and that if they are successful, we should receive some cash in the fullness of time. So, as I thought, upon inspection, there would not be any windfall anytime soon. That then necessitated a couple of follow-ups from me, and Richard confirmed that the sale price agreed was fixed regardless of when in the future those production figures are achieved, or if they're achieved. So no allowance for inflation or the copper price. And another thing I confirmed is that if Guardian Metals sell to a third party, then the agreement stays in place. So those are a couple of examples of why I might contact an investor relations manager. They are a rarity. I'm hardly running people ragged with why did the share price go down today, but I think it's justified if you require further elaboration on what you might be making an investment decision about.
In Andrew's case, does he have a wider role?
Yeah, for clarity, despite IR being Andrew's primary role, he's also responsible for corporate communications. That's including internal communication. It's important that your own people know what's happening. and also ESG. Let's hear a collective groan. I asked Andrew what were some of the typical duties in his investor relations role, and he used as a broad example that when we met, it was on the back of the Trump tariffs, and around 2/3 of their institutional shareholders had contacted him for the ramifications of how this would affect Victrex, and I think he said there was an existing 6% tariff in place. So at that point, they did not know if this would be 10% or possibly 16% as it was all new. Interestingly, in the last annual report, there are 12 institutional shareholders that have significant holdings, that's above that 3%, and their total 69.66%. And Andrew told me that only 5% of the company is held by retail investors like myself. Of those institutional shareholders, about 20% is US held, and that used to be until recently 27%. So it means that Andrew travels across the pond as part of the investor roadshows. And again, interestingly, Andrew said that when speaking with the US investors, they very rarely ask questions about ESG. It's more of a UK obsession. So perhaps that's another reason their economy does better than ours.
Okay, so what were you looking to achieve from the visit?
This is a more involved business. It's more technical. Some businesses that we've covered I find very simple and therefore do not require as much brain space. Tesco, Greggs, MP Evans, Nichols Vimto. I think most people, not just investors, could quickly ascertain what they do. When running a portfolio of 31 stocks, I can't be bogged down with too much of those that are highly involved. Now, I read the annual report, and it's a little like Genuine that we'd done previously. It's heavy going, and it's 204 pages. And Andrew commented that in his 10 years that he's been with the company, each year it gets thicker and thicker. And I would suggest that a lot of that is the ESG we mentioned. And in many ways, I feel this is a distraction to the core business. So sometimes the annual report is turgid, but also I find presentations heavy weather. They're often delivered with a presentation tone. They're littered with acronyms, industry jargon, and all that business speak. Things like migrate, which means move across, and gravitate, move towards, populate, fill it in, and add a little colour. Tell us more. So Andrew used a few slides, but more as an aide-memoire. But we had an old-fashioned two-way conversation that I could absorb and take notes with my coloured crayons.
Now, Victrex manufacture something called PEEK, P-E-E-K. So what exactly is that?
Well, come on, Paul. It stands for polyether ether ketone from the PAEK family, P-A-E-K family. That's polyaryl ether ketones. I thought everybody knew that.
Well, I obviously knew that, but it was just for the benefit of our listeners. So what are the properties of PEEK?
Well, Victrex present this as a polymer pyramid, with PEEK being at the very apex of that pyramid. Now, the key qualities include ability to withstand extreme temperatures, durability, chemical resistance, mechanical strength, hydrolysis. It's bioinert. It's got a high purity. It's got good electrical properties. It's easy for processing, and it's recyclable. But the key feature is that it's a lot lighter than metal, typically 30 to 40%, for which it's often used as a substitute. Now, other manufacturers produce PEEK, so Victrex do not have a patent on that, but they do have certain patents on the chemistry and what they do with it.
What about applications then? What are the key markets?
Let's take some examples. There's medical, automotive, aerospace, energy, oil and gas, and electronics. Now, remember that pyramid, Paul. We had some past experience of dealing with polymers. When we worked together, what we sold was right at the bottom of that pyramid. At the bottom of the bottom, we sold refuse sacks, bin bags. Now, if you had a product failure, then the downside was that somebody's rubbish was strewn across their driveway, which it often was. Now, in medical or aerospace, I would suggest the ramifications are a little more serious. Bin bags, it's down to price. A medical solution that improves the quality of life, chance of a higher margin.
Right, so those are industries, but can you drill down a little into actual applications?
Yeah, sorry, Paul. In medical, spinal work, apparently Tiger Woods has some Victrex product in his back. Heart pumps, Andrew showed me a trauma plate for fractures and a kneecap that they are bringing to market, braking systems. There's around 11 grams in the typical car. That doesn't sound a lot, but you multiply that by the number of cars. And there's around half a ton of PEEK in an Airbus A350. And I was shown a fuselage panel and parts of an aeroplane seat made from PEEK. Underwater piping for oil and gas. There's parts in EV batteries. And there's also Victrex film in iPhones to prevent them from overheating. So you can see if it's getting in a plane in the air, reducing the weight of those notorious EVs or lugging around a metal kneecap. Those weight-reducing features can be advantageous. Now, on one hand, we knock net zero, but at the same time, if it's done where it's economically advantageous and results in less fuel being burnt, then we embrace it. Again, it's probably why Victrex, like Genuit, are quite heavily pursuing net zero internally as they're beneficiaries of this trend. Of those two application, cars and aeroplanes, Victrex's midterm aspirations are to increase these from 11 grams to 200 grams with the increasing number of EVs, and from 500 kilos to 5 tons in each plane. And interesting to me anyway, on the medical side, I discovered that 15% of people suffer to some degree from metallosis, where the body does not accept metal implants.
So if things do take off, does Victrex have significant capacity to meet the demand?
Yeah, in that last year, they manufactured 3731 tons, and they've existing headroom to comfortably expand on this without increasing headcount. Now, capacity and continuity of supply is a very important selling angle. There are lots and lots of metal bashers in the world, but a limited number of people who produce PEEK. And you don't want hundreds of millions of capital tied up in an A350 in a hangar waiting for vital fuselage panels to be delivered.
So I would imagine that research and development is a major outlay.
Yes, this is 6% of revenue, but that's your pipeline. Also, some of the research is funded by the customer, and I've learned that in my own career that customers would often send me on false errands, arranging samples and free trials, and in truth, they had no real intent. It says a lot more if they're pumping their own money into a project. It's what we call skin in the game.
So if we rewind a little, when you are screening for shares to add to your portfolio, what made you decide to include Victrex?
It had high gross margins, a return on capital employed, and a track record of increasing dividends with regular special dividends thrown in. The reason why companies have better than average margins is generally that they've something that few others have and keeps competition at bay. It's what we call the moat. And Victrex's has been their niche at the top of that polymer food chain. For me, on the application side, the big draw was medical, and with the aging population, the increasing need for procedures. Andrew said that there is very little switching in the industry, which can be good and bad, but their customers were very sticky. The shares have underperformed, as I've said, but I would say that I've reached a ceiling in terms of capital and position in the portfolio that I don't want to surpass in relation to my understanding of the business. And going back to some of my larger holdings, Me Group, Unilever, Smurfit, Tesco, I have a good understanding of what the business does. Another of my concerns is that despite its attractive qualities that I've outlined earlier, over a long period, it's not been increasing its revenue to any discernible degree. Now, in 2024, production was that 3731 tons. 10 years earlier, 2014, it was 3551 tons. Revenue 2024 was 291 million. 10 years ago, 252.6 million, negligible. So I did ask the question, have we reached peak? You see what I did there? Yeah, so Andrew countered that they'd lost a large specific piece of business several years ago, which they'd anticipated to lose. And stripping this out, they had seen growth year on year. Now, I take this on board to some degree, but nevertheless, I'm always mindful of stripping anything out. The figures are the figures. It's a bit like when supermarkets say stripping out petrol, say. Why are you stripping out if it's something that you sell? If we strip out all the bad, it looks really good.
Now, Victrex has a number of markets which provide multiple opportunities and also diversification, but could that also present complication and confusion over where to focus?
That's a valid point and a two-edged sword. In the annual report, they advise that they will be transitioning more to a geographic rather than end market selling approach. And given the global footprint of Victrex, I expect this will reduce the globe trotting of certain key staff with the costs and time involved, but presumably this will necessitate reskilling as the sales force will need a broader understanding.
You mentioned ESG, and you often see businesses putting a disproportionate amount of time, effort, and expense into this. So did you raise that subject with them?
Yeah, during our fireside chat, I raised the question of things like the £69,072 given to charity and the 4,423 hours of volunteering that goes into community activities. And I don't think I know a single investor in my circle who champions either. And I'm genuinely intrigued. Who are they trying to appeal to? From a customer point of view, I gave the example of when you and I are in town and we're thinking of buying a pasty. I don't think we ever consider which establishment has given money to charity or lets its staff do work in the community. It's probably the quality of the product, price, and how long we have to queue. And at Victrex, each employee is afforded a volunteer day, but not all of them take this up. And they've done things like beach cleans and planted Christmas trees to stop coastal erosion. And actually in Korea, they say in the report, volunteering in the community for the second year, Victrex Korea employees volunteered at the Gangnam Support Center for Families with Disabilities, assisting elementary students with developmental disabilities in various programs, including music and health activities. The team requested a donation to the centre from the Victrex Community Donation Fund, further supporting these students and their families' development and happiness. Now, it might sound like I've had a humanitarian bypass and it's terrible, but I'm asking the question, when did businesses start becoming social workers? Andrew did point out that a lot of the volunteer hours go into visiting local schools and colleges and promoting Victrex as an employer. So, that's highly credible.
And what about DEI?
Yeah, again from the report, it says that the group continues to make good progress in our diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI journey. We now have 25% of our leadership group comprising females as part of our females in leadership target of 40% by 2030. We also established a further employee resource group, ERG, to reflect the increasingly international nature of our operations. Our race, ethnicity and cultural heritage, REACH group was formed this year, sponsored by a Victrex management team, VMT leader, bringing a greater diversity of employees together. Now, how distracting are all these internal groups and the criteria that you're trying to balance rather than just recruit the best candidate? And this extends to the boardroom. In the report, it says, at board level, the addition of Urmi Prasad Richardson enables us to meet the Parker Review recommendation of having at least one non-executive director with a non-white ethnic background on the board by the end of 2024. We have a clear target of 40% of females in leadership roles by 2030, with full year 2024 increasing to 25% and an expectation of a gradual upward increase over the coming years. Now, to be fair, Urmi looks like she has a strong CV and a good match. It says in the report, let's be fair, skills and expertise. Urmi has a wealth of global experience in executive and non-executive roles over a 25-year period. She has a particular focus on life sciences, biotechnology, medical and innovation-based business. Her previous roles, she started a career with GD Searle, part of Pfizer, and has worked throughout Europe, the US, and Asia Pacific. Her executive career includes roles at the Lind Group, where she was a global head of healthcare at Novartis Vaccines and Diagnostics, and out at Foundation Medicine, a Roche company. Other significant appointments, it says Urmi is president of EMEA of Thermo Fisher Scientific, and specific contribution to the company's long-term success. Urmi has extensive global experience in strategy, business development, commercial operations, and product commercialization in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Asia, and the Americas. Her wealth of relevant experience in medical and science-based innovation will be valuable as Victrex unlocks the true potential of its medical business. Really, that's all I'm interested in. If we take the England football team, for years it's been disproportionately represented by people of colour. And the reason is they're the best we have. So let's just keep to first principles. And I really do wish we could get away from all this categorisation of groups and group everybody together as people. Otherwise, I'll start campaigning for the misrepresented and often discriminated bald-headed community. So to answer that question of who is all this ESG, DEI appealing to, it's often the ESG focused funds, and as we've identified, Victrex is predominantly owned via funds. So, Paul, after that, any thoughts?
Well, as far as I know, the problem is that the ESG rating system is monitored by financiers, and getting a low ESG score can prevent PLCs from obtaining funds from institutional investors, and it can prevent them from obtaining venture capital. So I guess if they want investment for research and development, companies the size of Victrex are pretty much obliged to comply with DEI and employ staff based on race quotas, whether it benefits the business or not. I mean, I always thought that using race, skin color, religion, sex, or national origin as the only motivating factor in hiring decisions was discriminatory and technically illegal, but it does seem that the business world now considers itself to be above that law.
Right. Well, there's been an exodus of companies from the stock market. I think a consideration is this is the savings that can be made. Now, the cost of a listing, all those non-execs, charities and volunteering, managing ESG, DEI, etc., managing a shareholder base, and dare I say it, even having an investor relations manager. You could strip out a lot of costs by taking a business private, and there's lots of baggage that goes with being listed. And if we simply look at the life-improving nature of many of Victrex products, I would say that's a good enough contribution to mankind in itself.
On staff engagement, you told me that Victrex has a low turnover of staff, and in fact, the majority of employees are shareholders.
Victrex have several schemes where employees are offered shares, and 83% of employees are shareholders, which I find highly impressive, and I'm sure it helps motivate people to switch the office light off when they leave at night. I did ask if, given their speciality, recruitment was a problem, and also considering their geographic location. But they do a lot of work, as I said earlier, in the schools and the colleges, and that's a gateway into Victrex. And with respect to local places like Blackpool and Fleetwood, these are economically disadvantaged areas. So having an employer with the calibre of Victrex, with those value-added roles, is a rare jewel on that fouled coast. And they offer proper apprenticeships. Currently there are 48, and that's not like some apprentice retail shop assistant. Voluntary employee turnover is 8%. I've not a benchmark to gauge this, but it seems very low. And in comparison, I bumped into an old school friend a couple of years ago, and he's in a managerial position at a blue chip business. And he told me that their new CEO, on having looked at the business, told him that the employee turnover was not high enough. This suggested to him that the pay and conditions were too good and it needed addressing.
Okay, there are a number of AGMs that you've attended. Is this one of them?
No, they did apparently previously hold them in a hotel in Cleveland, but like many, they've moved this to London. That's where the money is. I did ask what kind of attendance they receive, and this is less than 10 typically. One year they had 3, and just 3. This is not a small cap. It's over 700 million. And I asked if this was disappointing or if, in truth, they were relieved that they got this rattled off pretty quickly. As part of Andrew's role, he provides briefings to the board with data and some questions that he thinks that might be raised. For example, if the effects of trade tariffs, if that had just been announced, if that particular moment in time. But one year there were no questions, just the formality of the resolutions, and he's did seem genuinely disappointed that there's not more engagement. So companies do receive criticism about the way the AGM has been conducted, and we've done this, but also shareholders have to up their game and shake off their torpor, and it can be expensive attending an AGM and involve people of working age taking a day off work, but often for what I think is a formality. But shareholders and companies together both need to do more to make an AGM a constructive event, and they're becoming a bit of an anachronism, and I think that's dangerous. So it doesn't mean just turning up and asking a difficult question, but I think a board can learn a lot from shareholders, and in nothing else, they can find out what's important to them. So here's a direct appeal to shareholders. Let's try and build AGM attendance. And coming back to the earlier point, expect more from our companies in terms of communications, and with the vehicles that we have, social media and our own networks, call it out when it's unsatisfactory. Companies often do in-depth presentations to analysts, but in my experience, a lot of those analysts are pretty green, and they don't understand the answer that they've been given. And I think very often shareholders have a better understanding. So perhaps if they held it locally, they would have a higher number of people attending. If not, if only some employees or retirees.
So what's your stand now, and does it still have a role to play in your portfolio?
It's less than 1% of the portfolio, and given my exposure and the spread elsewhere, I'm prepared to sit and hold and see how the story unfolds. That story looks promising, but I would need to see further evidence before committing extra capital. Obviously, if that evidence materializes, then generally that will be reflected in the share price that I'm able to get in at. But on balance, I'll take a watching brief.
Out of all of their markets, is the one that you are mainly pinning your hopes on?
It remains medical. We have this global phenomenon of an aging population. When I was born in 1966, the global average life expectancy was 56.4. By 2022, it was 72. Now, older bodies require more interventions, and there with a reduced supply of younger people to keep the whole system going, the whole system of people going to work, and that Ponzi scheme of state pensions that have already been defaulted on by putting the retirement age back. We need to sweat our human resources as much as we can. That means patching them up in various ways through healthcare and surgery and sending them back into the workplace. Medical was 4% of volume, but 18.2% of revenue. So you can see where the added value is.
Now, PEAK is an expensive product. How vulnerable do you think it would be to a recession?
Most businesses are affected to some degree by a recession, but some perform better than others. Some prosper like receivers. It largely comes down to the items that can and cannot be deferred. Carpet is a prime example. You could survive with a threadbare carpet indefinitely. It may look unsightly, but broadly it would not impact the quality of life. Against that, if your knee wants replacing and it's creasing you with pain, then that is a lot more pressing. The markets that Victrex are in are higher value, and their importance of part of the overall application is often mission critical.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Mark, for that analysis of your investment in Victrex. Well, that's all for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember the content is for information only, and it is not financial advice. If you have a question for Mark for our Question in a Bottle podcast, just complete the form on our website, thedesertislandinvestor.co.uk. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.